Hi, and welcome to this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Today we're tackling a critical issue that's closer to home than many might realize: human trafficking. Joining us are two leaders from One More Child, a Christ-centered organization fighting to protect vulnerable children and families. We're honored today to have two great guests. Claire, who's Director of Anti-Trafficking for Tennessee and North Carolina, is joined by Jamie, the Executive Director of Anti-Trafficking for One More Child nationwide. Did I get those titles correct, ladies? I hope so.
You did a great job.
Welcome to the program Mid-South Viewpoint here on Bot Radio Network.
Thank you for having us.
Now, Claire, you're not a stranger to the show. We just got together a couple of weeks ago with my dear friend, Pastor Sean Abram of the Binghamton Community Church. Sean also, of course, is the director of Sin Relief Memphis, which we talked about the connection of One More Child associating with this ministry. We got to talking during that interview time that we ought to just expose One More Child and talk just about you guys, because this is an incredible organization. Jamie, I did not realize, correct me if I'm wrong, that this organization has been around for 100 years?
Yes, it has actually been around for over 100 years, since 1904. We were in the business of advocating and helping children who didn't have a home and were in need of a foster home, or at the time, which was the standard of care, a group home to care for them, a Christian group home. And we did that in the beginning through Florida Baptist Children's Homes, and started really in a small town of Arcadia, Florida.
Okay. Florida is where you're based out of, is that correct?
It is.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That is incredible to be associated with an organization that's been around so long. You know, Bot Radio Network will be celebrating 63 years of broadcasting this year, broadcasting Bible teaching programs, Christian news and information. And it's kind of neat when you're connected with an organization that has that type of history. All right, Claire?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the credibility of the organization, gaining trust in communities as we work with vulnerable children. And there's pretty amazing people that work for the organization of One More Child. So it's that alignment of these core values that we hold central to how we approach the work has made all the difference.
In the introduction, I started out talking about anti-trafficking, human trafficking. And I know that's an aspect, but it seems like there's more arms connected with you guys and ministry-wise. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we are a multifaceted ministry, and we exist to provide Christ-centered services to vulnerable children and struggling families, as you mentioned. And in decades of doing this work, we've identified specific areas of focus and expertise. So those are child hunger, single moms, foster care, struggling families, and then the work that we do specifically in anti-trafficking.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of key in today with you both, Jamie and Claire, on that particular topic. And why don't we start there with you, Jamie, and why don't you briefly share your role and what drew you, and I want to find out the same thing from Claire too, but what drew you guys to work with anti-trafficking?
So I have to say that I was raised by a single mom and saw vulnerability around me, always had a heart for it, which led me to go to law school, which brought me here to Memphis, Tennessee. And I knew I wanted to be a state prosecutor. I did that for almost a decade, where I got the opportunity to help vulnerable survivors in that line of work for almost a decade, trying high violent crimes throughout the city and just seeing vulnerabilities. After that time, I was just drawn to the other side of the work. Sometimes I refer to it as behind the curtain. The courtroom contains a lot of things that have happened in the past, and getting justice and seeking justice is definitely a biblical thing. But the ability to walk alongside with that survivor and see their next steps.
Right.
How are they going to thrive? How are they going to thrive from a Christian perspective and through a Christian support system? And that drew me to the opportunity to work with One More Child and the things that they were doing to come alongside those people really for the rest of their lives if needed.
Right. Can we stop a second and define a term? You use the term vulnerability. And I know that gets used a lot today when we're talking about ministering to impoverished areas and things like that. Can we kind of describe your definition of what we're talking about?
Well, that it's really hard to describe the word vulnerability, but specifically in anti-trafficking, we see it as individuals who are not able to be self-sufficient. And those individuals who are not able to be self-sufficient due to trafficking are oftentimes not able to economically support themselves, emotionally support themselves. They don't have a religious support system. So we're able to help them understand how to seek out and identify those things while also helping with resources.
You know, it's interesting, Jamie and Claire, that you mentioned this, because I have had other guests on that are involved with ministries similar to what you do with anti-trafficking. And some people would say, how does a young lady get trapped in this cycle of this lifestyle? And I've heard people tell the story, it is so much like a family, especially if they are in these vulnerable situations like you just described. They maybe have a very mixed up family life and they don't have much money. They have an opportunity, what they think is family, and somebody to care for them, to watch out for them. I mean, it's kind of weird, right, Claire, to even think like that, but that's kind of where they're coming from, many of them.
Yes, and unfortunately in our work, we have to be mindful of that. You know, what was the angle of the trafficker or the exploiter? And a lot of times they're very crafty in that way of identifying where's a gap in what this young person has or needs, and how can I meet that need? We call that grooming, which really grooming is just you're pushing boundaries, and that happens over a series of events, a length of time, and suddenly that young person is doing things that they're very uncomfortable with and that create a lot of shame for them.
Right.
So really, there are a lot of factors, like if they're involved in foster care, if they have issues with drugs and alcohol, if they have instability in their home. And a lot of the young people that we work with, their main desire is belonging. And the reality is that love has been very confusing to them. That's been distorted. And so there's also confusion about boundaries. That's something I work on with every person we encounter, is just the concept of safety with yourself and how to communicate boundaries to other people, because all of that has been massively confusing because of these circumstances they've been in, these situations where adults were not safe.
Right. Jamie, from the legal standpoint, you as an assistant district attorney working in these court cases, is the legal system supportive? Do you feel like that they're doing a good job trying to, convict criminals and protect the vulnerable?
I think that they are doing better every day. I think that there's been a lot of education around specifically anti-trafficking and how to address the situation, how to prosecute those that are taking advantage of people, while also not misidentifying the survivors and victims in those crimes. And because law enforcement officers are receiving more training and understanding if they're in the midst of an operation or arrest and they identify a trafficking survivor, they are now equipped better than they were 5-10 years ago with how to help that individual and to not blame that individual right away or mistreat that individual in a way that would be harmful to the prosecution because that individual wouldn't want to be cooperative.
Yeah.
And also to give the individual the best chance at starting out well and not re-engaging in trafficking quickly after that instance.
And multiple times that I've gone to a Walmart and I've seen like this guy come in with several girls. There's something that's not right, and you don't know what to do. You can tell by the look of these young ladies' eyes. You can tell by the way they're dressed that something's not right. What does a citizen do when you see something like that, Claire?
So we really promote, if you see something, say something. So if your gut instinct, as believers, we acknowledge that as the Holy Spirit. And so if there is a sense that something is off, someone's not safe, the situation that you're witnessing is inappropriate, then we encourage people to call law enforcement. We have a 24/7 hotline that people can access, and I'll share that number.
Let's go ahead and do it now. Yeah.
So it's 901-713-3181, and that number is monitored 24/7, so you will be in contact with someone on our team. And we're happy to help people navigate situations of reporting, or if they just suspect something's off, if they want us to meet with someone that they have a relationship with, and they suspect that they're not in a healthy place,
Right.
we're open to all of that.
Wow.
So there's also trafficking hotlines. We absolutely encourage people to say something. We don't have to have concrete evidence that exploitation is happening to file a report.
Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily have to address the individual at that time. That's probably not the best idea, right?
Right. That could create more harm or danger for them.
Right. Okay, so what does a typical day look like for someone working in anti-trafficking with one more child? Is there a typical day?
Well, every anti-trafficking team has its own structure. We have found that what we refer to as the mobile teams is our best structure of helping individuals. And it depends on your role. So in each team that is fully staffed, we have a clinician that helps with counseling. We have an advocate that is kind of more the typical social worker and helps with all of those life needs. And then we have a mentor survivor who can come alongside and in kind of a life coach fashion, help that individual set goals and see what's next in their life in a positive way. So an advocate is doing lots of things. They may be looking for housing. They may be sitting at the DMV, and they may be going and helping an individual look at a new school opportunity or something like that, get a new doctor. It could be so many different things. With a clinician, they are using their master's level clinical expertise to have counseling with the individual that helps them through the trauma healing process. That's the hope. And then with a mentor, lived experience, survivor, individual, they may be meeting them just to say, hey, what are your goals in life? What do you want to do? And that's a new conversation for a lot of these individuals because these individuals haven't yet thought for themselves about how to have a life free of crime, free of any sort of drug use or manipulation or unhealthy romantic relationship. And really get them in a mind frame of saying, I can do lots of things with my life in the future,
Yes.
And how to do that.
Do you have suggestions or ways, even maybe seminars or things you can help parents? Say we have somebody listening right now, their daughter just entered a relationship with somebody they're not sure about. Maybe this person just moved from out of town, those kind of things.
Well, first, let me say, as a mom of 5 kids, this is very serious to me. I've seen kids recruited. More and more young people are being recruited online. So I tell parents, monitor the things they're doing. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to have an app or check every text. But if you feel like they're talking to someone they shouldn't, ask about it. If you are worried or feel like they're in danger, don't wait till they run away and go missing. Take the phone. Protect your kids because there are a lot of vulnerabilities online. We also offer a anti-trafficking 101 where we go over social media safety and some internet safety tools. And we happily go and offer this to parent groups so that they can learn, some of the emojis that are used that are kind of secretive in nature or things like that. So I definitely say to all parents out there, it doesn't look like a white van driving up and kidnapping someone most of the time. What it looks like is someone reaching out through a gaming app or through social media to say, you look beautiful.
Very
and that's
innocent
how it
in
starts.
some regards, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It starts out pretty innocent looking.
So what would be some common myths about human trafficking, especially in places like here in Memphis?
I think the white van story is definitely a common myth. Most people think that every trafficking story starts with a van when in fact that's a very small percentage. I also think many people are surprised to know that the national average age of a sex trafficking survivor is 13. And people usually envision them much older. Also that it's overwhelmingly female. We are seeing male survivors, especially in kind of this new age idea in teenagers where they grapple with their sexual orientation and things like that. We are seeing more and more males be identified through law enforcement and operations as sex trafficking survivors. So I think while it is still majority female, we do see male survivors more than people think.
Boy, it just breaks your heart to think just how young these children are. I've even heard stories of being as young as 10 years old, and I'm sure you have too in some cases, even stories where parents are trafficking their own children, which just blows my mind. Even here in our city, there's been reports of that. How do you guys help survivors? Because I know your Christ-centered foundation is what you believe, and that's our hope, right? He's our only hope. Thankfully, we have that hope in him to offer those who are surviving such incredibly dark places where they've come from, Claire.
I think a big thing that we work on with survivors is helping them understand their exploitation. So a myth that I would add is that a lot of people that we begin working with, they don't recognize that they have been taken advantage of because the self-blame is so great that they experience. And so from a clinical standpoint, we're working really hard to give that shame back to the abuser, which is a really difficult task.
Yes.
And it's really critical that we get that right, because that shapes, especially with kids, that shapes how they view themselves, that shapes how they think about the world and their sense of safety. So that would be a place to start. And, a lot of these, we deal with crisis. We work with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of making sure that food, shelter, clothing, all of those needs are met so that they're in a position to do the deeper trauma healing. That takes so much energy. It takes so much of your presence. And if you're worried about where you're going to get your next meal, you can't be present for that kind of work.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the beauty of this team, is that those pieces work together to make sure that they are in a position to do their therapy work. And then I guess another thing that I would add is that a therapist a long time ago encouraged me, if you don't know what to say, just ride the bus with them. Metaphorically.
Okay, yeah, right.
And I draw back to that a lot, because we're encountering horrific stories. We're encountering injustice unimaginable. And so when that happens, it's really critical that the people on our team know how to sit with someone in their devastation, in their heartbreak, and not run away and not grow afraid of that. Yeah. And of course, we have to do a lot to process that on the back end. But it's, a big piece of what I do is validate. You're so brave for telling me this. Yes. And I'm so sorry that happened. And a grown-up broke the rules. They shouldn't have done that. Right. That's a kind of language that I use. So something that I've found in this work is that how someone responds to the abuse or trauma is almost just as significant as what happened.
Yes, I can definitely see that. So one more child. We've talked about the rich history, over 100 years. How long have you guys been here in Memphis? You're relatively not very long, right?
We've been accepting clients in Memphis for almost 3 years. Okay,
so I had no idea until I met you when Sean came into the studio. Now, are you primarily working with Center Relief Memphis and their community center? Is that where you're based out of, or do you have another office here, or?
Well, we will be based out of the Send Relief, the new community center that is scheduled to open as soon as we get a certificate of occupancy. So we hope
the center hasn't opened yet then?
It has, but the expansion that we're part of hasn't opened. Okay. So Send Relief is very active. We love them. We love working with them. But the part that is going to house our office isn't open quite yet. We look forward to it very soon. We actually partner with some churches here in the Memphis area and work out of their offices, but our clients come from many different areas. They come from other nonprofits that don't have the specialized program we have. They come from the Department of Children's Services, sometimes through law enforcement. And so if someone can even self-referral, which we've had happen before, they've identified, hey, I need the services. I've heard about the services you're offering. So they can come from just about anywhere.
We can't go into details, I know, and I wouldn't want to, but is there a safe place if you're pulling somebody out of a trafficking situation that is very serious, where they can go for some of this recovery and some of this help? Is there a place like that here that you guys work with?
We work with several, actually, and we also work with ones outside of the area. Okay. Sometimes people, their trafficker or traffickers are very skilled at finding them, and they may come to us and say, I feel more comfortable going somewhere else. And we partner with safe homes and safe places here, as well as outside here. If someone wants to go away, we have those resources as well.
So these partnerships are so important. I can see that. Talk about the kinds of partnerships that are necessary to really successfully combat trafficking in a city like Memphis.
Well, we really need to partner with creative problem solvers. So that's why it's so important that we work with Send Relief, because I can quickly assess, hey, I need a housing option for this person. They have 2 months before their lease is up. Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of that co-working space, that we can quickly assess needs that maybe we're not able to accommodate, but we can connect with someone closely. So even like this week, I'll be meeting with HopeWorks, and they connect people with jobs in our city, which is a huge deal, because we need someone that understands these people are coming from a place of trauma. They need someone to take a chance on them, to build them up, to coach them. So that's a really integral partnership that's forming. Things like that, I'm trying to see who is doing this work creatively, who is thinking outside the box in providing care.
Yeah. And so the local church, is that an important asset for you guys?
Absolutely. Individual Christians who want to give as donors or volunteers or pray for us or partner in any of those ways are essential to the work we do. It's the reason One More Child has existed over 100 years. And the impact that one individual who's passionate and willing to give their time for any of those reasons and more can really change the lives of the people we help.
And I would say, listeners, please pray for this organization. That prayer is the most important thing you can do, along with giving and volunteering and supporting and being engaged with this issue. What about success stories or moments of hope from the work you've done so far here in Memphis? You have anything you could share?
Well, children just astonish me. Their resiliency, their capacity to move past trauma. And so I've been able to work with kids in creative storytelling of their trauma. We call that trauma narration. And it has blown my mind. Just, seeing kids, when I first began working with them, they're so dysregulated. They can't stay calm in their tiny bodies.
Right.
And by the end, they have these coping skills. They have the ability to tell what happened to them, and you experience in them a sense of freedom, that they move through their life with more freedom. And that is the goal of all of this. So I would just say working with kids in particular has been deeply hopeful, because I think God made us that way, with that resiliency built in.
We also have had tangible success stories, such as a client getting a job after a day of driving them around looking for a job opportunity. We've seen them get housing and helped them clean their house and things like that. And that always brings so much joy. It makes all the hard work and effort put into those things so rewarding. It feels like we are very lucky to get to do what we do with individuals who, many of them have never experienced a positive support system.
Wow. That support means so much. And I can see how that would work in their lives to help transform their lives. So what motivates you ladies to keep going in such emotionally taxing roles? Because you probably kind of come home some night, like you said, I bet you hug your kids a whole lot when you come home at night, but when you, after a hard day, how do you keep doing this? Claire, we'll start with you.
Well, I kind of joke, if God had asked anything else of me, I'd be doing that. So I feel a strong conviction that this is what He's built me for. And I've always felt drawn to stories of trauma, helping people from traumatic situations, wanting to serve marginalized people group. And He sustains me. I might get beat down one day, and then the next morning somehow I'm able to go to my session, and while I'm meeting with that person, I'm praying fervently, because sometimes I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to respond to what they're telling me. So that's a huge piece of how I restore my soul, is in that time with God.
Wow.
But I've always asked Him to give me meaningful work, and He's done that.
Yeah.
So prior to this, I worked in addiction treatment, but it's all unfolded so beautifully and in a way that I didn't anticipate. But I just feel that he's with me, that he's championing this work with me.
And plus, you're seeing life change. If you were to go and there was nothing happening, they weren't really being drawn into this relationship with Jesus or seeing them want to change, that could be discouraging.
Right.
But we know through the power of God's Holy Spirit, He is working and things are happening. So that has to be an encouragement. How about for you, Jamie?
It's very similar to Claire. I would add that those moments with the clients is very big for me. It is the hope for the clients who haven't seen success moments and had success stories. It is that hope that keeps you wanting to come back every day and fight even when things don't seem very optimistic. I also think that from my role over the national program and overseeing such a staff, it is so invigorating to see young people coming out of college, coming out of these master's level programs saying, I want to help change lives. I want to be the hands and feet. I want to pray that Jesus uses me to impact positively the lives of those who are struggling. And that is just incredible that there's so many people who come to us and join our staff wanting to dedicate so much of their time and energy to help those in need.
So what's the one thing that you wished every person listening to us today would take to heart about human trafficking?
I think Claire really hit on it earlier, is that the self-blame of most survivors is much greater than those things. So before you judge someone's behaviors or actions when they're caught in a vulnerable relationship, like one with an abuser or a trafficker, try not to judge and love first, because we see it day in and day out. The trauma they've experienced, the things they've been told, it is very impactful to their mindset. And so their behavior may look bad to you, but what they've been through and what they're going through right in that moment is oftentimes hidden. So I just ask people to try not to judge and think about all that they could be enduring.
Yeah, I think I would just want people to walk away with the realization that this is a real problem. And it's difficult to talk about. These are not conversations that people run into, right? But it is really important, especially as believers, that we know about this, that we're curious. And, when churches contact me and they say, hey, we want to do this Trafficking 101 video series, that thrills me because that's 20 women in a small group that have this information now, and they're leaning into the conversation rather than shying away from it.
Right.
So I do think there is a level of boldness that we were asked to walk with. We can't turn away from what's hard and gritty about our city. We have to be mindful and engaged in those conversations.
Because that's what Jesus did, exactly what He did. Okay, so you just mentioned the Trafficking 101 video series, and that is one way that people can get involved with One More Child. That'd be like foundational, just to get open your eyes, So what's that number to call again if somebody would like to call and have you bring this video series to their church or their Bible study group or what have you?
Yes, so I shared the crisis line, but I'm going to share my work number too.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Because they're different.
Okay, yeah.
So that number is 901-618-1003. So if anyone's interested in partnering with their church, bringing this information to a small group, we absolutely welcome that. You
also, I know, need to partner with businesses, as we mentioned, churches as well, of course. And so if those would like to sponsor this organization, One More Child, in a financial way, what's the best way to do that, Jamie?
Really contact the number Claire just gave, or to go to onemorechild.org. It's pretty straightforward on there how to give. You can read more about all different 5 of our focuses and decide what you're interested in being part of, whether that means giving or having a training for your staff. We don't just train churches. So any of those opportunities are available on the website.
Well, we have definitely heard today a sobering word that's filled with hope. I will have to say that. The fight against human trafficking can, I'm sure, feel overwhelming at times. But as you, Claire and Jamie have reminded us, change starts with awareness, compassion, and action, and it's happening right here with One More Child in our city. Friend, if you want to learn more, you can get involved or support the work of One More Child. Visit the website, onemorechild.org. Whether it's donating, volunteering, or simply educating yourself with others, you can definitely be part of the solution. Claire, one more time, the hotline number, if somebody is a suspicious activity or maybe they're stuck, they're hearing the show and they want out of the lifestyle trafficking,
Absolutely. It's 901-713-3181.
Okay. Ladies, we'll have to do this more often, and I want to keep this in the forefront of our listeners as well. So thank you so much for coming by.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. We do appreciate you stopping by. I'm Byron Tyler, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.